Welcome back to World War II TV, and I hope you enjoyed yesterday's show with Susan Yu talking about her father in World War II, and today we have someone else talking about, in this case, their mother in World War II. If you are new to the channel, there's new people coming in all the time at the moment. Thank you. The information you always need is in that description below. You'll find links to my guests' websites, merchandise, etc., etc., etc. But anyway, NCR Davis joins us to talk about her mother's service in the ETO as a US Army nurse. Her book, For the Boys, is available in the links below. Here's my copy here. You can also go to her website. If you live in the USA, you can order a signed copy directly from her. But I'm going to bring her in now. So good afternoon where you are. How are you today?
I'm great, Paul. And you?
I'm good, thanks. So
Good.
I like to ask a first-time guest kind of how you define yourself, because some people think of themselves as writers, military historians, biographers. Some people don't care what label they put to them. How do you define yourself?
Um, I guess I'll tell you that through my education, I was trained as a writer and I taught writing in college for 8 years before I left academia. And then I did corporate writing my whole life. But when my mother turned 90 years old, she gave me her war archives, hundreds of letters, her service diary, photographs. And she asked me to edit them for the family, and I didn't really know what she meant by that. I'm the youngest of 6 children, and I thought that she gave them to me because I was the only one who was a professional writer of the 6 kids. As I went through the process, though, I realized probably after she died, because I really could never really get to what I really wanted to write. I never really could write the truth until after she was gone from the planet. And it was then at some point I realized, gosh, you know, first of all, I wish she'd given it to somebody who didn't know her. So I had
Mm.
that problem. I wish she'd found some journalist or someone, not me. And secondly, I decided that even though I had defined myself as a writer my entire life, pretty much professionally for sure, that it wasn't because of that that she gave me those at all. I realized that she thought I was the kid who needed it the most,
Ah,
who needed to grow up the most. I was the
wow.
youngest of 6 and spoiled. And I think that's why she really did it. And
Wow. We're deep already. I feel like it's a psychiatrist couch coming up
I
here.
know. I know.
But
Yeah.
anyway, we'll bring up your PowerPoint. And folks, what we're going to do today is we'll do your questions at the end. I will jump in a couple of times with comments, but basically we'll hold the big questions for the end. And I'm going to hand over to Nancy to take us through the story there. And I guess we said on in the pre-show chat, we might talk about this issue of objectivity. And, obviously there's no one who knows their parent's story better than the child. But also, are you somewhat kind of blinkered? Are you not seeing things? But we can maybe discuss later on. I'm going to hand over to you. Take us through your this incredible story. So the ball's all yours.
Thank you. So, as I mentioned, my mother was 90 years old on her 90th birthday. We had all flown to Virginia where she was living with one of my sisters. My father had died a couple of years before. I was the youngest of 6, and she asked me to go upstairs with her to her room after a bit of too much cake and champagne, and asked me to help her get ready to take a little nap that afternoon. And when we got up there, I saw that big red book that you see there in the slide. And I'd seen this throughout my childhood in different houses up in a closet, that sort of thing. And oh, those are Mama's war letters, I knew, but that was it. I never had opened them. And they were sitting there on her nightstand. And she said, "You remember that, right?" "Yeah." And then she went over to her dresser and she pulled out a little service diary in which I had never seen. And I started flipping through that, and I realized the last section had been ripped out. So that was kind of a mystery, and it's that one right there. So her last entry was, I believe, May 5th or May 6th, 1945, very end of the war. And then a whole section, and I knew, I went over, I thought that she had told me through the years that she didn't leave for back home until the end of October. And so I knew she'd been in post-war Germany, so I went over to check, and yeah, her last entry in that letter, the last letter, the book of letters, was October 31st. So there was an entire 5 months there that she didn't account for in her service diary. When I asked her about it, I said, "Mother, what happened to this last section? You've got 5 months here that are not here." "Oh, and she was very evasive. And then I knew there had to be some sort of answer to that question. I found out later. So that's one of the mysteries of it. But anyway, so she just said at that point, "I want you to edit." And I didn't know what she meant. So I obliged her, and I took the archives back with me to San Antonio, where I was living at the time, and began reading. And a couple of months later, I called my sister and said, "Put Mother on the phone." And she did. And I said, "Mother, these letters, I felt like they were very sugar coated. And I knew that there was some editing from, the powers that be back then. I knew there was censoring because it would even say in the letters censored.
Yeah.
Oh, and one thing, those were all typed and bound because my grandmother had them all saved. And she saved all of my mother's handwritten letters, and then after the war hired a typist and had them bound. So that's why they appear in that book like that. But even the typist would block out and say censored, as if it were, from the handwriting that it came that way. So she would do the same thing. So anyway, I said, I know there was some self-censoring going on too, because of course you're writing to your family, you don't want to worry them. I understand that. But if you had one word to describe the war part, once you hit that ground in Normandy, what would that word be? And it took her less than 2 seconds. And this is a very reticent 90-year-old classy lady, just never heard her eh, say an expletive. And he said, when I said, "What one word would you use to describe that war?" She goes, "Rage." And I just couldn't believe it. Oh, Paul, I had to sit down. I remember I was standing by the bed and had to sit down on the bed. I was so shocked by that's the word that she came up with 65 years after that war. So,
I mean that is very telling, and we'll let you explain more. And I think people will agree that are watching this that there's maybe a perception that nurses are meek and mild, and maybe there's some truth in that. But in a war zone, obviously things are very different, and the reality is you're dealing with people you can't save and people who will be dying, and no matter how well you do your job, the flow of casualties keeps on coming. We'll let you expand on that later on. So yeah, rage is an incredible word to come back. My elderly relatives fought in the war. I don't know what I would say. It would floor me if they had said something like rage or anger. It would have I'd had a real open mouth reaction to that, as you clearly did yourself.
right.
Anyway, back to you. Should we move on?
That's just a picture of her. For the next 2 years, when she said the word rage, I said, put Susan, my sister, back on the phone. So she did. I said, "Susan, I'm going to need Mama to come and live with me for a while.
Wow.
I got to get to the bottom of this." And that was, I think, maybe within the first year. She lived with me for 2 years. And in the afternoons, we would have coffee and pastry and talk about the war.
Wow. Well, back to you. Let's take us through the story. And folks, of course, don't forget to go and buy the book as well. Always more in the book than there is in a presentation. But back to you.
So here is an interesting story. My mother was quite beguiling, and one of the things I think that Casemate, the military history publisher who ended up publishing the book, when we were going through the editing process, They wanted more of the nursing, the clinical part in it. They also decided on, I believe I was in my 7th iteration, and you know how that goes. And they said, "You made it really dry." And I said, "Well, because it's historical. It's not, made up. It's not fiction." And they said, "But can you write it as if it were fiction so that women will read it?" Because um, they were hoping that this story would be their breakthrough book into the female demographic.
Mm.
It has not turned out that way. It's still men who buy the book. But one of the stories that I ended up putting in there that was absolutely true, that I don't think was in the 7th iteration. So the version that is the book today is the 8th iteration. And there's a story in there in which Mary was quite beguiling, and she knew that her parents would not want her to join the service. And she thought, "Well, I know what I can do. I can get one of my best friends whom they just really respect and love and think is so responsible, and they think I'm irresponsible. So I'll get Lorraine Matsky to go with me to the war, or, well, to the service." And so this is Mary is here pictured with Lorraine. Lorraine is the taller one on the left. And Lorraine Matsky was one of her best friends. She had also been to nursing school, didn't go to University of Minnesota school, nursing school, another one, but they both were nurses. And my mother met her at my mother's father's dining room in the train depot at St. Paul, and asked her to meet her for coffee one morning. And she said, "I think we should join the service. And I want you to go with me to Fort Snelling to do that." And so she thought that would kind of mitigate the the absolute freaking out of her parents that she went and did this, because her father was a private first class in the trench warfare in World War
Right.
I. So she didn't know. Of course, he'd never mentioned anything except that she heard him screaming at night sometimes. And her mother would say, "Oh, he's just dreaming. He was dreaming about the war."
Wow.
And so she knew enough to know that he would not want his eldest daughter to be going off. And Lorraine kept saying, "Oh, it'll be all right. That would the way we're ripping through everything over there in Europe, that war will be over by the time we're done with our training." So with that, they joined.
And their motivation, Nancy, was it, or your mother's motivation, was it primarily just to serve her country in any capacity they
Yeah,
could, or was the nursing aspect of equal importance?
it was two things. My mother was highly competitive, very competitive, and she happened to be at the depot, St. Paul train depot, the day of Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. She had gone there to share a chocolate malt with her daddy. She was very close to him. And as she walked in to that train depot, she felt something was off. And everybody was shushing and saying, "Be quiet." And they were turning on the radio to listen to the announcement that Pearl Harbor had been attacked. And she told me when I was interviewing her, she said, "What you have to understand is that Pearl Harbor was our generation's 9/11
Mm.
for you." And I said, "I see." So she said, "And I was raised in a very patriotic family. My father was in the National Guard. He'd served in World War I, et cetera, et cetera." And so very, my father did a lot of civic work with the veterans till the day he died. But, when he was still living, when I joined the service, and I pretty much decided on the way home from that day that I heard the news that I was somehow going to serve. I just didn't know how. So she, from a patriotic standpoint, but then what really pushed her, she was in her last year of nursing school then. So she wasn't ready yet. And then she thought, well, then I've got to get some practical experience. I can't go over there as a novice or wherever they send me for training. So then she decided, yeah, I need to work after I graduate for a little bit and then I'll join. And then at some point during that evolution, she decided, oh, I'll get Lorraine to go with me. And that way, maybe they won't be so mad. And so it wasn't until 1943, the spring of 43, that she joined. War was still going on. No more excuses. Got to do it, you know. But the impetus that really kicked her was they got these flyers. And I've actually seen them since. In her ward at Miller Hospital, which was a private hospital in St. Paul at the time, they went around with these flyers and posters asking the nurses who were there to train the new nurses coming in so that they could go serve the boys. And that just kicked her in the gut. And she said, well, I've got more experience than graduates just coming out. They should send me, not them, you know. And so that was the thing that really kicked her into gear and decided it's time to ask Lorraine to go with me.
Brilliant.
So that's Lorraine. And they end up they first are at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, where they do their training. And then, boom, 3 months later, they're in maneuvers in Middle Tennessee. And so those are those pictures.
Brilliant.
They're over there washing their fatigues, you know. Have you ever heard this? She told me this, and then I think I was able to verify that this was right. She said that her chief nurse in Middle Tennessee, that was over the 39th for the nurses, told them that the reason Middle Tennessee was chosen for maneuvers was because General Patton had a grandmother who lived in that area, and the topography is similar to France's topography in the Normandy region. And that's why he chose that area. He was one of the ones who said we should train them there.
It's ringing a bell. There's something familiar there. I'll have to check that out. But it's ringing a bell there somewhere. And, you know, when your mother joins, I don't know whether this is in the letters or whether in your conversations with her, but, you know, the military is back then was a very male environment. Was it immediate welcome from everybody? I mean, nurses, I think, are treated a little bit differently than perhaps women who are trying to become flyers or you know, aviators. That nursing has been more associated with that gender for centuries, I suppose. So, but did she experience anything? You know, what you're doing here? Or was her experience generally good?
Oh, it was fantastic.
Brilliant.
Everybody treated her with the greatest of deference. She never had that from any, you know, they did cat calls and stuff, but not, you know, she has so many photographs. And I just recently, they didn't get in the book because I didn't know, you know, the problem with having so many siblings is they all have something. And I just received an album a few weeks ago that I'd never seen before from one of my sisters. She brought it to me. And in it, my mother, when she said the boys, she was really referring to the patients, but she was also, as I saw so many times on the back of photographs, it was photographs of the enlisted, you know, because she felt like they were the ones who suffered so much, you know. She wasn't able to, you know, as an officer, she couldn't date an enlisted guy, but she had so much appreciation for them. And there's just photograph of, you know, she's got a photograph of all the ones who were in the mess and all the ones who were in the, you know, just different areas, the sentries, and just, she was quite taken with their bravery. And every once in a while she would write about one and she would say to her daddy, oh, he's a very poor soldier. You know, he's not, but very rare. The other thing that I thought was really interesting was she loved being an officer and loved what that came with, you know, that automatic respect. And she said that she thought about that the first night that she was there in Fort Leonard Wood. She said that actually got me to sleep that night, thinking about the fact that, hey, I outranked probably half the guys here.
Yeah. Which suggests that she's ambitious. I mean, that she wants to.
Yeah.
This is. I mean, my grandmother. We're going down a rabbit hole, but my grandmother did a little bit of work in an airfield in England, but she wasn't ambitious. She wasn't trying to, get beyond just doing a little bit of help. But your
Oh, I
mother is
see.
obviously on a path because she would have been reaching crossroads at all the point. Continue to train other
Yeah.
nurses, staying in hospitals in the US, but she ends up overseas, and I'm assuming she had to keep pushing herself to go that way because that's where she wanted to be. Because the place you're needed the most is a nurse. Is if you want to look after enlisted men, is as close to the front as possible.
Yes. That's really fascinating. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, we'll move on for the phone. Keep on talking. We're loving it. Everyone's thinking it's fantastic. So, training in America, and then at what point does she go over to the UK? And what with
So
what unit was she at the time?
the 39th Evacuation Hospital, and that was another point at which she realized, oh my gosh, there's so many men compared to women, was when she was boarding the HMS Andes for in the port of New York to go over to England to be billeted until it was time for the invasion. And golly, there were thousands of soldiers going on that gangplank with only let's see, how many nurses did they have at the time? 40, I believe, 40 females, and everybody else was male on that boat, thousands of them. And she ended up meeting my father on that ship and spent 10 days with him on that boat. And that's how they fell in love. But
Wow.
then they were, when they were billeted in England, oh, she had the most wonderful time. They were great hosts. She ends up getting kicked out of the first host's house, though. And that's a whole story in and of itself. My mother was really rebellious. She was ambitious, but quite rebellious. It wasn't much for rules. And my father was just the consummate officer and very much into rules. And he worried about her. He thought she was, really playing with fire the way that she was, you know, she felt like, oh, they need me way worse than I need them. By that point, after going through the hell of maneuvers, that was so shocking for someone who was quite spoiled, that she decided, oh, to hell with this. She could speak fluent German. So that's why I think they ended up wanting her so badly in that unit. So because they knew they would be capturing enemy soldiers.
Wow, we're going potential so many different areas we can take this conversation, but we
Yeah.
one of the things I think is important to remind ourselves is that when we get to D-Day, and we've had our D-Day coverage back in June, is that invasion force was simply the tip of the spear. It was the first lot of people going through, and hundreds of thousands of more Brits, Canadians, Americans, and Poles were going to be coming through in the weeks afterwards. And one of the questions that we've raised in this channel before is it kind of better to go in early when there's an element of kind of naivety involved about what's ahead, or is it worse to go in later when the full realization of how much work a hospital will have? Because when we get to June, your mum was still in England. Wasn't in
Correct.
France
Yeah.
till some
She was
time
the
later.
second wave. Yeah.
So does she write about the information that's coming back? The reality that there are people dying and being wounded in combat, and at some point that will be her job.
No, she does not do that at all. And I don't know how much they knew. I don't know how much was getting back to them. She writes to her parents, you know more than we do at one point. Well, she says that several times. So I'm not quite sure what she knew. And they were so busy packing medical supplies and doing last minute training. And, they were just really consumed the last couple of months that they were in England. So, and she had, I do remember that, they started to get a few little patients trickling in, but not really where she was. So, she really didn't have she just was thinking of the heroics of it all still at that point. I mean, because you can tell that by the shock of when she really first got there when it was daylight and she
Which,
still saw
yeah, well,
paratroopers from the trees.
just while we've got the picture of your mum in England, Ian Carr, who's in England, is saying, where was she in the UK? Where was she billeted?
She was in, um, you know, let's see, what was I hesitate to say the name because I know I'm going, it's Altricham. How would you pronounce that?
Altrincham, I think that is. Yeah.
Altrincham. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So that's north of London, I believe.
Someone, I don't know exactly where it is. Someone will know. But you're leading us, segueing us into that rival into France. And one of the things that, of course, you said at the beginning is you are able to draw on all these letters. And as you said, she is writing to her family. She's covering up certain amounts of the detail in some ways. You don't want to worry them, but the realization of actually what it's like would have come pretty swift and fast. So explain that initial arrival and what we're looking at here.
Yeah. One of the things that she did not write in the book, but that I got out of her, and this is fascinating because for the first several months, I couldn't really get her to open up. She still wanted to keep it real superficial during the 2 years that she lived with me. And so one day it just occurred to me, I've got to figure out, it wasn't a hack or a trick, but it was, I don't know how it came up, but I just said to her mother, I feel like we need to get to the next level of some of this stuff that because I had been doing research along with, so I knew where she was, So I pretty much mapped out and I knew she'd seen some terrible stuff. So I said, what would it take to get you to talk about the stuff that you're really not talking about yet, or your letters only hint to? And she said, well, I said, because I think that your story is too important just to leave for the family. I think it's got to go. I think I would have a chance to get this beyond the family. And what would it take for you to be able to tell me some things that you probably don't want to revisit? Well, do you think that you could finally get my friends, the gals, some thanks for their service, because they never got anything when we got back home? And I said, I think I can. I mean, that would be the goal. And she said, well, okay, I'll try. And it was a breakthrough. And she just had to keep remembering that she was doing it for, most of them were dead. I mean, probably all of them were dead by then. But it didn't matter to her if it was posthumously. She just wanted them to get some recognition. So wasn't too long after that she told me about seeing some paratroopers still in the trees. And that was 6 weeks after the initial invasion. So that told her, my God, they were so busy. The first group that came in, they couldn't even pull some of these boys down from the trees. So that was horrific. And the exhaustion she saw on the faces of the evac that they were replacing to give them a break. So the first evac there was there for the first 6 weeks, and the 39th and some other evacs were sent in to give them some relief. So a lot of what they inherited, the 39th inherited at the very beginning, were enemy patients. So she hit the ground running with that because she would have to translate and stuff. And then the ones that were just so ill that they couldn't move. And so one of the first patients that she has is one of those who was so sick with pneumonia, they thought they were going to lose him. And she was specialed to him, so, which meant she was only responsible for his care to try to get him through the nights. And so she was put on night duty for 2 weeks, only specialed to this one kid. And so, and he pulls through it. He's only 19 and a tanker. And by the time he got well enough to get back, they couldn't find his tank unit anymore. So he ended up becoming a ward boy for Mary, for my mother, for couple of months, and they got very close. And then he ends up coming back to the unit with a horrible tank injuries later, and that's in the book and what she does because of it. So that's an interesting part of the story.
You need to explain the snafu taboo bit on there. People are discussing in the sidebar there. There's obviously a story there. So hand it to you.
So shall I read this or not?
Read it or explain it. It's up to you. Which way you want to go.
So she says, I thought maneuvers were rough, but then we weren't prepared for that. And we are for this, although it's rather different than I anticipated. I'm sure it was. Wish I could tell you all about it, but everything is snafu, as you realize. And I just thought that she meant taboo, as in, I can't say very much in letters, because they'll be censored. But she put snafu, which means situation normal, all fucked up. So I'm not sure what she meant. I don't know. I mean, to me, it means that she may have meant taboo instead of snafu. But there were little things like that in her letters that I just think. And I asked my agent, Peter Riva, about those and said, should I correct them? And he said, heavens, no. We want them the way that she actually wrote them. Don't correct anything that she wrote.
I mean, my hunch is that she means snafu, but I don't know her, as you know her, so I don't know. It's just, but the interesting thing, as you're suggesting there, is with sleep deprivation, with all this trauma and drama around you, you're trying to, that the letters are going to be censored, but you're also self-censoring because you don't want to upset members of your family. So
there's a lot of levels going on here.
Yeah.
Right.
No, but very, very revealing. So, you mentioned this earlier, the fact, that she went away without her family's blessing, but by using her friends. So, did that haunt her for a long time?
One of the hardest conversations I ever had with her during those 2 years of San Antonio, and I could remember exactly where she was standing in my kitchen, and it was just so palatable, the guilt. She worshiped her father, absolutely worshiped him. And he worshiped her because Mary almost died of tuberculosis when she was 12 or 13 years old. And for an entire year, she was sequestered in her bedroom. She begged them not to send her to a sanatorium, those TB sanatoriums. I don't know what they were, if it was that bad in Europe. I haven't researched that.
Yeah, big in UK. Yeah.
Okay. So she was an avid newspaper reader at that age and knew that those sanatoriums they called them death halls. And when she came down with TB, she said, please don't send me there. I'll die in a sanatorium. Everybody dies if they go there. So she begged to not be sent there. And her grandmother, who was her paternal grandmother, her father's mother, had been a licensed practical nurse during her career, an LPN, instead of a registered nurse like my mother. But she said, I will come in and move in with you, and I will sequester myself in her bedroom with her and nurse her. And she spoke that grandmother of my mother, the paternal, she was full German, and she didn't even hardly speak any English. That's when Mary really learned German. And she was so weak at the beginning of that illness, that during the first several months, that they got her a little chalkboard, and before they knew it, she started writing her request in German because of her grandmother being the only one in the room with her. And she started reading her all the children's classics in German. So that's how she became fluent in it. And of course, when she convalesced, she, by the time that year was up, she said, I'm going to be a nurse like my grandmother one day.
Mm.
And of course, it was very fated that, she was so inspired by the care of that grandmother and then learned to speak German that she ends up where she does in that war. But what happened during the time that I was interviewing her about her daddy, she said she was on the streetcar and she was on her way to Fort Snelling. And she saw in her peripheral vision it was a familiar image. And she turned and looked out the window, and her father was walking down the street in downtown St. Paul. And he never met a stranger and was greeting everyone. And she looked at him and thought, oh my God, I'm betraying the person I love most in the world.
Wow.
Here he is just going about his day, and I'm going about my day doing something behind his back. And she told me that story at 91 or 92 years old, and she started shaking. I mean, it was still so palatable. And I knew, God, she's going to die with that guilt.
And that's extraordinarily revealing about the complexity of feelings people are having across the world. The world is in peril, and people are questioning their patriotism, their loyalty to their families, their loyalty to their ancestors, because she's got the German ancestry as well. And these decisions individuals are making around the world is, do I wait to be called up? Not in the case of women. In this case, do I go and do something? Am I proactive? Which comes first? Country, God, family, all those things there that come into the mix there.
So
And we talk about these units in terms of numbers. There were X number of nurses, X number of infantrymen, tankers, but every single person who served is in some ways dealing with this internal moral compass. I mean, even on a basic level of the men I've spoken to who had to accept the fact they killed other human beings. That's a big thing to deal with. It's for the right cause, as Lee Marvin says in the film Big Red One. We don't murder, we kill. It's because Mark Hamill, Luke Skywalker says, well, we're murdering Germans. He says, no, we're killing Germans. It's very different. So we're going down a massive, great rabbit hole. But this is so much insight into just one woman's service affecting a family and affecting the people around her and the siblings. And I'm enthralled. But we'll move on to more about the letters and this G Daddy slide. So back to you, Nancy.
I do want to read this one. I think this is it's not the most powerful, but it gives a little bit of a real glimpse into this. When things were really, really hard, she only wrote to her daddy, not to her mother. And then she would typically say, if you think mother can handle it, let her read the letter.
Wow.
Gee, Daddy, if I come home with white hair and look about 40 years old, don't be shocked, because many more nights like last night will make nervous wrecks out of us. She was 23 when she wrote that, so I guess she thought 40 was old. That's funny to me. It was fairly quiet until about 1 a.m., and then somebody opened a terrific barrage that just about shook the patients out of bed. And me, well, I just grabbed my helmet and hit the dirt. Then one of the boys from the other ward came to see if I was scared, and he was so scared himself, his teeth were chattering. Instead of comforting the patients, it was the reverse. They've been right up there, are used to it, I guess. Well, we probably will get used to it too. And I feel like a coward, but we'll try to overcome my fear so I can at least take a temperature without trembling. And then all the things we see and hear make us want to cry. We feel so desperately sorry for these boys, especially the younger ones, but they're wonderful soldiers, Daddy, and the best patients in the world. I swear I'll never complain about the fact that it's rough living the way we do after talking with boys who've spent days in muddy foxholes. But no matter what they've gone through here, these Yanks just never lose their spirit. Of course, they're pretty shaken up and terribly nervous, but they can still joke and appreciate the swing music we have going from dawn till blackout.
That's amazing. And it's so revealing, because I bet the GIs themselves are thinking exactly the same thing. They're probably thinking the nurses are the calm ones, and how amazing how they're doing their jobs, and they're going about giving people injections and taking temperatures, and we're terrified. And yet your mum is saying the opposite. But that's perception. I remember having a conversation with two veterans where one said, "You know what? I was terrified all the time." The other guy said, "I thought you were my rock. I thought you were always covered." And said, "I thought you were and he said, "No, I thought you were the rock." And each one thought the other one was the rock, but actually they were both terrified all the time. I think
That's just incredible. That's just being fully human. That's amazing.
And that's why these kind of books are, the details of troop movements and where the hospital was on what date, you can find that on the internet. It's the feeling of what someone is going through on this journey. Someone who is guilty, feeling guilty being there in the first place because of her father. And there, there's a map of the route they went. And these hospitals, they were, as you explain in the book, they're as close to the front line as they can be, evacuation, or without actually being on them. But they're bloody damn close. So
That's right.
that's the ETO there. That's the right across the front there.
My mother was having a lot of problems with her teeth. They didn't get any good nutrition, for a long time. Her teeth started breaking down, and the way that the 39th was set up, Third Army kind of set things up a little bit differently than First Army. They all did kind of their own thing, but in hers, the dentists they were back in the COMZ, in the communication zone. And she would have to go there for some of her tooth problems when she could get a chance. And she said one time she was there and waiting for the dentist to be able to see her, and she was right next to one of the phones that the engineers had set up. And it was the lieutenant colonel talking to Patton on the phone, and she overheard the conversation. And she could hear Patton, because he was, they say he had kind of a wimpy voice, but she said he was so angry that she could hear him. And he said, "By God, my boys are up there on that line. Your nurses are going to be right there with them. And don't think they're not." Because the lieutenant colonel kept saying, "We're getting too close. We're too close to right there. We're right here." And he said, "And by God, you're going to stay right here." So that was interesting.
We did a fantastic show on World War II TV a couple of years ago with an amazing Belgian, I think, doctor, talking about the hospitals up near Bastogne, and how he had all the data of how far away from the front the likelihood of survival dropped. If you're 50 miles away from the front, it was at whatever, 30% chance of survival. If you were 5 miles away from the front, it was 70% chance of survival. I mean, they're not the fact. That's just an example there. But they had absolutely learnt by the winter of 44 that every mile makes a difference. And when you're transporting casualties on ambulances or on foot, on stretchers, every yard, frankly, makes a difference. So the hospitals were, as the war was easing off, in the sense that the outcome is getting closer and closer to being resolved, the hospitals, it seems, get closer and closer to the front, because there's now this even more of a burning desire to bring these guys back. We've come so far now. Let's bring as many of these wounded guys back. So weirdly, as the outcome of the war was getting more certain, the hospitals actually got closer and closer to the front. That's how I remember things.
Yeah. One of the things that comes up over and over again is the absolute, she was so proud of the EMs. She called them emergency medics. I know sometimes they're just called medics, but she always called them EMs in her letters. And she just had, of course, great respect for them. And she said, "Daddy," I remember one of the letters, "you just wouldn't believe how many boys they really save them from infection. They just pour that sulfur powder in there in the wound, and it really helps so much to get them at least, from the battlefield to the field hospital and then to the evac." And we've only had 2 by that time. I can't remember when it was, maybe October of 44. We've only had 2 to end up dying from infection from the wound because those EMs do such a great job. And that was
Brilliant.
interesting.
It is indeed. So we'll move on. There's, the recurring theme is doing it for the boys, and the fact that she's taking photos of the guys, enlisted men, the personnel is key to the whole theme of your book, which we'll come back to later on. So you just keep talking. We're loving we're hanging on everything, every word you're saying. So keep on sharing stuff.
Yeah, so these were 2 pictures that I just were in the album that I just got. So didn't make it into the book, but I'll just put out more and more that I've gotten from social, on social media from time to time to let people see. And there's some great, as you know, I love this World War pictures, World War photos or something on Facebook. It's just fabulous photographs of. I've really been enjoying that, and that's been the other thing that I started off, thinking, well, I'm doing, even though my mother died in 2020 and the book wasn't published until last fall, 3.5 years after her death. I really thought, the goal is to get some recognition, like she wanted. That was her dying wish. But then once I began the actual promotion of the book, the gratification, I feel the same way that she did almost. It's like I'm replicating, even though I have guilt that I didn't serve. I feel like it's been the men that have been so appreciative. And I really thought, because I wrote the book, I stylized the one that actually got published to read like fiction, even though it's true. We were trying to get the female readership to come along, but it's been the men. And a couple of months ago, I've been trying to tour every war museum in the state of Georgia where I live. I'm starting with them, and then I'm going to branch out, probably go to Florida after that. And we have 11 museums on world war museums in the state of Georgia, part of the Georgia Heritage Trail. And one of them, of course, is Currahee, which is fascinating. I love it in Currahee, and Currahee is only 2 hours away. So I try to get up there a lot now that I know about it. I really enjoy it up there. But I had gone to another one, a training for pilots down in Douglas, Georgia. And I met with 4 veterans down there who helped so much with that museum. And 2 of them, I think, were Gulf War veterans and 2 from Vietnam. And I said, let me ask you guys something. Why do you like my book? I don't understand this, because I wrote it really to try to get women to read it and start appreciating history a little bit, and to start realizing, their gender was involved in that war, and their gender is involved in every war. And they need to, and I really had this, I feel like, God, I'm spoiled, and I was born in 62. The people now, I think, are, the 20-year-olds are really spoiled in Western culture, and they need to see what was sacrificed for them in order for them to be that spoiled. So I kind of had that in my mind. Maybe I can get young women to read this, but so far I haven't been able to. So what is it? And I wanted to ask it from the veterans. And one of them said, oh, you mean, because you put all that romance in there. And I said, well, I didn't put too much romance. And he said, oh, well, we just ignore that stuff anyway. I said, well, what makes you like the book? And he said, I'll tell you, one reason is that when I was about to go fly a mission, if I wasn't gravely wounded, I wasn't going to see the surgeon. I was going to see a nurse.
Yeah.
When I got back, a medic or a nurse was going to be taking care of me if I got anything less than gravely injured. So we have a tremendous tremendous respect and reverence for the nurses. And we want to see it from their perspective. It really helped me. It really helped me understand. And it gave me more of a confidence. You were talking about the squirrel on one side and the
Yeah, squirrel of self-doubt. Yep.
yes, because when I would get up and when I do veterans groups, I always feel like, oh my God, I can never be in their shoes. I can never be in their shoes. They're not going to want to hear me. And then every time they do want to hear me and they want to hear my mother's story, which I just think it's been the most gratifying thing.
Well, and we're so glad you're sharing it with us, and it kind of dovetails nicely with the next slide, which is the determination you're showing to bring the story forward is the same determination that your mother was. So, yeah, are these lessons you put on the slide there, is that something your mother kind of expressed directly, or is it something you kind of pulled together from the interviews and from the letters? Would she say that? Would she say, these are here, Nancy, here are my 3 principles for survival?
This is what I got out of a particular story. That's one of the, I think there's 2 mainly cruxes in this story of hers. And one came when I referred earlier to that private that she had taken care of back in July, and he returned with 40% of his body burned and a gunshot wound to the chest. And they were holed up then in Heinrich Himmler Barracks, about 12 kilometers from Bastogne at that point. And their supply room had been shelled, and there was no blood plasma for this kid. And she couldn't take it. She absolutely refused to hear there was no plasma for him after she had gotten him through, along with her other nurse friends, had gotten him through that pneumonia. She wasn't about to let him die then when he came back to the unit from tank burns and a gunshot wound to the chest. So she was herself very sick and ended up with something that we didn't find out until years later, was angioedema. But anyway, she had this terrible swelling in her foot and she couldn't walk. But of course, she went to night duty anyway, and she was getting the flu, but it didn't matter how sick she felt. She was going to be there and pull her shift. And so when she got there and her friend saw, the chief nurse saw, oh my God, you're limping again. You've got that edema. You've got that swelling in your foot. And she said, yeah, but I'm okay. I'm here. And so she said, she told her the terrible news that her dear friend was back in the unit, and they didn't have any plasma. And she refused to hear it. And so she got another young nurse to go with her. She felt like she was, ancient by then. She wasn't. She was 24 by then. But she got another a nurse who had been recruited from the Red Cross to help out, and leaned on her to get over to the shelled supply room. And when she got over there, they had flashlights and they're digging through all this rubble, and they find a crate. And she says, what about that crate right there? It's not damaged. And the girl said, yeah, I looked at that earlier, but we can't use that. Well, why not? And it had been labeled colored. So it was for the African-American boys only, because they separated plasma. They were, it was a discriminatory practice, of course. And it was so stupid. And my mother could not believe how stupid that was.
Yeah.
And so she limped over there and ripped off 4 labels that said colored on every freaking bottle. And she shoved them into the girl's hands and said, get them over there to surgery right now. Because she couldn't run because she was sick and had that horrible swollen foot. And she said, they can court-martial me if they want to. I don't care.
It's a good hill to die on, though, isn't it? I mean, if you're going to be caught for something, breaking down barriers and saving lives with different, unquote, blood is a good way to go down. You know,
That's
I die on
exactly
that
right.
hill.
And she was, and it was just so telling. And when I asked her about it, she said it was war. And she would say that a lot. But what I call it is moral courage, is what
Yeah, yeah.
JFK called, it's moral courage. When you dig deep and you really find out who you are. And that's what I came up with. There were several examples of that throughout this book. And it was, yeah, I don't really give a shit about being a good soldier at this point. I care about saving this kid's life.
Mm.
And that girl did turn her in for that. But she ended up getting a commendation for it instead of chastised or
Good for
anything.
her. Fantastic. So, we're nearing the end of the show now. And one of the things about anyone who goes through the ETO who gets to Germany is you end up at some point, most units, British, American, Asian, you're confronted with the Holocaust in some
Yeah,
shape or form. Um, and particularly, I've read many memoirs of medical personnel who found everyone finds it tough, but there's something particularly galling for people with a medical profession who are there to save lives, there to, human life is precious, to then discover the true evils of ideology and what it was all about, and the absolute
exactly.
disregard for human life. And we're going to have an image. We're not going to keep it on screen for very long, folks, because YouTube don't like it, graphic image. We'll keep it there for a bit. But your mother, but tell the book involved aspect of your mother's service. But we will move on from the photo pretty quickly because I don't want YouTube to flag things up. But
Yeah, and I just found this was one of the photos that just showed up in the album that I was just given by my sister a couple of weeks ago. She swore that she wasn't going to go to Buchenwald. General Patton specifically asked them to go.
yeah,
He wanted them to see it. And she kept saying she didn't go. I don't know if that was not her photograph. My father had another photograph that was not nearly as graphic as this one that's
yeah.
in the book. And it was the photograph that he kept in his wallet for the entire time he lived. And I found it still in his wallet after his death, a couple of years after he died.
Wow.
It was still in his wallet with his driver's license and a couple of dollars, and that was it. And he had that picture in there. And when I was a kid, I had asked him about it. And he told me just very quickly that he said, this is, you'll find out what this is in school. And if I were to give you one word, it's tyranny. And when I think about the guys that didn't get to come home, that I fought with, and it hurts so badly, I sometimes will just pull this photograph out and know that they died to fight tyranny. That's what we were there for.
Well, I mean, it's the whole "Why We Fight" episode of Band of Brothers. That, if anyone, I don't think many GIs and Tommies and cadets need any reason to keep on fighting. But if they did need a little bit of encouragement to push that, go over that last furlong, because it's been a long war. It's the realization of exactly what ideology they were fighting.
Yeah,
So as we bring things toward them, we've got a few questions for you, and obviously you're doing a
sure.
fantastic work now, educating me about your mother's service. But we're going to bring it right back to the beginning and the rage. Why rage? Did your mother explain it to you, or did you have to work out what that was all about?
We got to it later, much, much later, almost to the end of my interviewing her. She felt more and more futility toward the end, as this is just too much death. It's too much. This is ridiculous. Our boys are getting slaughtered. So the longer it went on and they kept being promised it was going to be over, they thought it would be over by Christmas, uh, just everything past Bastogne. Just when they started treating those boys from the 101st and after Bastogne, they were one of the units that got them. Oh my God. From then on, she was very angry. And I guess that she never really reconciled it. So for my dad, it was just pull out that picture out of my wallet and look. To him, he kind of compartmentalized it and
Mm.
said it was for this, it was for these people, for this ideology we had to fight. But for my mother, she just had a hard time with, she felt like a lot of boys were lost for no reason.
And it's
So,
interesting that that I don't quite to explain this. She used a single word to kind of convey that experience, but actually trying to drill down on it and explain what was meant by that becomes a bit too complicated, because you're trying to analyze what one word means, but actually it means a lot of things at different times. And the experiences you went through, it's to try and put a neat bow on it and say it means this would be
yeah,
simplifying the concept in some ways. It's an expression, but we're not necessarily meant to fully understand because we weren't there.
it's a
Your
very
mum was there.
packed word.
Yeah.
You put war in that, it's really packed. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we'll do a couple of questions that we have from the viewers. So, well, this is a comment from Peter. The combat nurse's combination of danger, horror, and endless stream of broken kids seems a perfect recipe for PTSD. No wonder they came home angry. So PTSD is it's been a buzzword for the last 7 or 8 decades, but it wasn't really back in World War II. Do you think your mum suffered from that, or
Oh,
survivor's
yeah,
guilt?
yeah. In
Yeah.
fact, there was so much that I didn't understand about idiosyncrasies, weird things that she did while I was growing up that were just so bizarre. I didn't start understanding them until also I was the youngest of 6. And I think, and now that I am in my 60s, I realize pain starts bubbling up when you get, if you're lucky enough to get into your 6th decade on this planet, things that you were able to suppress. My mother was 60 when I was 17. And I think that the two of the youngest kids, my sister Sally Kay and I, may have seen the manifestations of that PTSD
Mm.
coming out more and more as my mother got older. And by the time I had her live with me in her early 90s, oh my God, she had so many strange things that she would do. And one of them, for example, was I would get her in the shower and she said, you got to I've got to see the steam. I've got to see the steam. So she would sit on the bed and I would have to prove to her that steam was coming out of that shower before she would let me disrobe her and take her into the shower. And so one day she said, I know you think I'm strange, but you have to understand for 2 years in that war, I never could get warm. And it terrifies
Wow.
me to be cold.
The,
Things
the,
like that.
this is the insight. We're back to that whole question about objectivity and understand, but this aspect could only be done by you or someone in the family, because you were the only ones who spent enough time with
Well,
your
thank
mother.
you.
But someone else could have compiled a combat history of the hospital, but that's not the same. That's not telling the same story
The humans, yeah.
for the same audience, in a sense. Wow, we have a couple more questions. Gina is saying, did her mum ever meet any of the servicemen she treated after the war? Did she actively try and find some of the guys she treated?
Absolutely not. In fact, she would have nothing to do, and she'll have to read why. My mother went into seclusion when she came back from the war and saw no one for months. She holed up in her bedroom, her childhood bedroom, and her meals were brought to her. She waited to take a bath at night after she could hear that her parents had gone to bed. She couldn't face anyone. And she decided during that seclusion at some point that she was going to never have any communication with anyone from the war that she experienced. She couldn't she put that behind her. So she never talked. The only person she ever talked to were my father, because he didn't share the same war that she did. which was one of the reasons that she chose to marry him versus a doctor that she'd fallen in love with during the war. She shared the war with that doctor. She could not share the rest of her life with someone who had been through that experience with her. Secondly, she only had contact with Lorraine Matsky, the one that she had talked into, because she had known her before, and Lorraine didn't end up going to the war. She got kicked out during maneuvers. So she didn't share. Everybody else she shared that war with, she never spoke to again, even though she loved them more probably than anyone.
And that's fascinating, because it's like Lorraine maybe represented the Mary that didn't go to war, so she could be friends with her and keep it, because that was old Mary.
That was
But
old Mary.
people,
And my father, because she was the innocent Mary before she saw anything.
Wearing different hats in some ways and analogies. Well, folks, you know absolutely what to do. If ever there's been a show I've done where there's a must-have book, this is a must-have book show, because it's insight. It's insight into, it's very grounding, this, because I do lots of shows at channel where we're getting to the intimate details of battles and which battalion moved off at which, on which terrain feature to attack this town. But this actually ends up just making us all realize the problems people face who went and did what on face value. Well, it's nursing, isn't it? It's guys just put a band-aid on and pass me over the doctors. I'm trivializing it there, but actually the amount of ordeals your mother faced is there's something to be learned from that. Well, people are already buying it. Someone just clicked and bought it right now, so it's fantastic.
I appreciate it very, very much, because I feel that, and I know you do too, because I've watched many of your shows now, and I know that you feel that to educate people is to honor those who served. That's the way that we honor them, is to educate people about those sacrifices. And that's what we're here for, right?
Exactly. It's why we don't do many of those which tank is better kind of shows, because that ends up becoming about technology and kit, and there's something we're trying to do something a bit deeper here. So well, folks, we will have things soon then. I'm back again tomorrow. More shows coming this week. Tomorrow we have the big panel discussion about Verrières Ridge, so in Normandy, happening 80 years ago this week. And then we've got 2 shows on Friday, one about Saipan and the missing from there. And then in the evening, we're doing one with Steve about the 1st Division on Omaha Beach on D-Day. So there we are. Thank you very much, Nancy. I can't wait to talk to you again. I'm going to just invite you back and do more of this. I liked it a lot. So let's make a date and bring you back.
Wonderful. And I'm definitely going to talk to you about one of your tours.
Brilliant. That sounds fantastic. So, folks, thank you for your questions. Thank you for your insight. Click like and subscribe. Buy my guest books. This is Paul Woodhouse for World War II TV saying I'll see you all again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody. Thanks for watching. Bye.